Alright, this is chapter 8 plot, and we all think plots and stories are kind of the same thing, but a story is kind of told in the chronological order of things, and then but a plot, it always asks like why things happen. It's not necessarily a chronological thing, but it kind of gives you an explanation of what's going to happen before, and then and the definition of a plot is the artful arrangement of incidents in a story which each incident building on the next series of a cause and effect. So basically, the plot is it gives you one thing which is going to have an effect on later on in the story, what they're doing, and then it's talking about the greasy lake, written in the book. It says. It says if they simply spend the night driving, drinking, stopping at a friend's house, and throwing mailbox, the story would be rearranged in chronological events. But once the narrator says that he lost his keys and taunts the wrong guy, it kind of gives you the added dimension to the story that makes it a little better, and then that's known as suspense, which is a sense of anticipation or excitement about what will happen and how the characters will deal with the newfound predicament. And then the secondary word for plot is conspiracy, which is you're always questioning what you're always told. And then and as you're going on, it talks about the crafting of a plot, and then one of the definitions for that was exposition. Exposition is the presentation of necessary information about the character's setting or character's history provided to make the reader care what happens to the characters in the story. So it kind of gives you a background of what the characters are and who they are and what they do, and it kind of gives you an idea of what they're gonna do throughout the story, which gives you like their background information of what their motives are and what kind of person they are. And then it says some stories begin in the media res, which is in the middle of things, and then there's a lot of poems and things that start in the middle of stories. I mean, I've watched plenty of movies that they start in the middle of the thing, and then they go back to the beginning, and then they finish, or it's just all about starting in the middle of the story. And then a flashbacks to the device and moving back in time to the point before primary action of the story. It usually pertains to something that you're talking about then, and then they flashback to give you an idea of what they're talking about. It says the real how and why this particular group of people crashed this particular place, but the backstory is only slowly revealed. It also talks about foreshadowing, which is a hint about plot elements to come to both advance to the plot and build suspense. And then in the greasy leg, it says Boyle flashes forward this line. It says this is a tactical error and damaging irreversible in its way of Westermore's decision to dig at Kyan Sash. And it says all stories have a protagonist, which is the main figure, and this is the guy who is speaking of the story in the greasy lake. He is the protagonist. And then the greatest tension in the story of its climax where it's a crisis, the narrative turning point, and the struggle between opposing forces, which is showing the protagonist has a problem with the other person who is an antagonist, and the antagonist is opposition of forces to the protagonist, and what they usually have happen between them is the rising action conflict, which is the main part of the story, which is which reaches its height of the story and kind of gives you an idea of it. And then you kind of have a climax, which is the top point of the story, and then after the conclusion of the story or the resolution of the story, usually falls of the denouement, the following action and resolution, and then that kind of just gives the nice settling end of the story, which gives it a nice complete finishing the story. Or if not, it's the action following after the conflict between the protagonist and antagonist, and that's the chapter 8 plot.